Close your eyes for a second and picture this. A woman is standing in the center of a village square. Her hands are tied. The wood beneath her feet is already smoking. Around her, hundreds of people watch. Some of them are her neighbors. Some of them attended her wedding. Some of them brought their children, specifically so the children would remember. Now here is the question nobody asks about that image. How did she get there? Not spiritually, not theologically, legally, politically, economically. How did a specific woman in a specific village on a specific date end up standing on that wood while the woman next door did not? That question is the one that changes everything, and the answer is not the one you have been given. The European witch trials are one of the most misrepresented chapters in the history of violence against women. The popular version says it was mass hysteria, superstitious peasants who did not understand science, terrified of storms and sickness, blaming the strange old woman at the edge of the village. That version is comfortable because it makes the perpetrators seem ignorant rather than deliberate. It lets history off the hook. The reality is that the witch trials of the 14th through 17th centuries, which killed somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people across Europe, roughly 80% of them women, were not random. They had a pattern. And when you follow the pattern, what you find is not hysteria, what you find is a machine. Look at who was accused most often. Widows, women who had inherited land or property after a husband died and had not remarried, had not handed control of that property to a male relative, and were managing it themselves. In documented trial records from Germany, France, and England, researchers tracing land ownership found the same thing repeatedly. Property that belonged to an accused woman transferred to her accusers or to the church after her conviction. This was not coincidence. In a legal system where a woman convicted of witchcraft forfeited everything, accusation was also a mechanism for asset transfer. You did not need a legal battle, a prolonged dispute, a court negotiation. You needed 3 witnesses and a confession. The confession could be extracted by torture. The witnesses could be coached. The outcome was predetermined the moment someone decided it would be. Now consider the second category of frequent targets, midwives and healers. Women who held knowledge about the female body, about herbs, about pain management during childbirth, about what worked and what did not in the treatment of ordinary illness. This knowledge had been passed down for generations, woman to woman, outside of the control of the church and outside of the emerging structure of what would become licensed medicine. The church had a specific problem with this. Knowledge held by women that the church did not sanction was, by definition, knowledge that came from somewhere else. And in the theological framework of the era, somewhere else meant one thing. The Malleus Maleficarum, the 15th century manual for witch hunters written by 2 Dominican inquisitors and endorsed by Pope Innocent VIII, states directly that women are more susceptible to diabolical temptation than men, and that the female of the species is the natural vessel for evil. This was not fringe theology. It was a published, widely circulated document that shaped trials across the continent for 2 centuries. So midwives who delivered babies without blessing, herbalists who healed fevers without prayer, women who knew which plants caused miscarriage, which ones brought on labor, which ones dulled pain in ways that made male physicians nervous. These women became targets not because they were harmful, they became targets because they were useful in ways that no one had given them permission to be. Now consider the third category, old women who lived alone. Women who had outlived husbands, outlived children, outlived their social usefulness in a framework that defined the woman entirely by her relationship to men. In many documented cases, elderly women were accused after refusing to leave their homes, after disputing property boundaries, after simply being too stubborn and too present for the comfort of those around them. Being old, being alone, being difficult to move, these were, in the documented record, sufficient. The trial of the Pendle witches in Lancashire, England in 2012 is one of the most thoroughly documented cases from this era. 12 people were accused, most of them from 2 impoverished families. The primary witness against them was a 9-year-old. The confessions were extracted under conditions that modern legal standards would consider coercive at absolute minimum. 10 people were hanged. The families they came from had been in low-level conflict with local landowners for years. This is taught in English schools as a piece of local folklore. It was a judicial execution of people too poor and too marginal to defend themselves, carried out with the full authority of the crown. And here's what ties all of this together into something that should genuinely disturb you. The women who were burned and hanged were not the most powerless women in their communities. They were often the ones who had managed to hold on to something, a piece of land, a skill, a form of knowledge, a degree of independence, in a world that was systematically designed to strip all of those things from them. The ones who had nothing were not worth the trouble of a trial. It was the ones who had something that someone else wanted who ended up on the wood. They were not targeted because they were weak. They were targeted because they had refused, in whatever small way, to be completely controlled, and the system around them had a mechanism for dealing with exactly that. It called the mechanism justice. It lit a fire underneath it and told the crowd to watch. The distance between that world and this one is smaller than the history books want you to believe. The specific tools have changed. The underlying logic that women who exist outside the boundaries drawn for them must be brought to account has a longer shelf life than any of us are comfortable admitting.
Therefore, no
that is the
transcription
thing
is
about
needed.
buried history. It does not stay buried because it's irrelevant. It stays buried because it's too relevant. Drop a comment below. Tell me what part of this you were never taught. Subscribe because there are more stories underneath the surface of what we call official history, and someone should be pulling them up.